Well, like Pastor said, my name is Jeremy, and I just want to share a little bit this morning about what God has done in my life. It's probably to this point. I say a little bit because honestly, if I were to share the whole story with you, we'd be here until October. So let me start now with just a prayer real quick. Dear Lord, I'm so thankful for this morning. I'm so thankful that we could all come together and worship you and glorify you. And I'm so thankful for the promise that when two or more are gathered in your name, you're here with us. And Lord, I just pray that your Holy Spirit moves over this place today. You open up the ears, the minds, and the hearts of everyone here today. And Lord, most importantly, I just pray that you allow me to lessen myself so that people can see you and see you reflected through my life, through what you've done to me, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. So, growing up, I was adopted. I was adopted into an amazing family. I had an awesome dad, a beautiful, wonderful mother. I was the youngest of 5 kids, 3 older sisters, an older brother. You had to be faster. You couldn't even get any food around my house. It was awesome. I loved it. It wasn't a perfect upbringing. My parents, I mean, they fought just like every other parent. And let me tell you, my mom, she could bring it. It was pretty intense. But most of all, I had some great role models growing up. My mother did her absolute best for us, worked her hands to the bone. My dad, he's a man's man. He could fix anything. He could build anything, but most importantly, God was number one in his life. And every single day, he lived that out. I never heard him raise his voice at anyone. He was, well, the older I get, the wiser he was. He was a great role model to have. Growing up, I was in the church every single time the doors were open. Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, any prayer meeting they had, my whole family was there. I was in Awana. How many of you guys were in Awana? It looks like kind of a few people were in Awana. All right. Sparkies, Clubbers. I was Sparky of the Year, I think 3 years running, Clubber of the Year. Went to Bible Olympics every year. I got really active in my youth group. I was teaching. I was helping out with music and ministry. I was even leading people to Christ. Looking back now, none of it was for God, though. Looking back now, I did it because it was what was expected. I did it because I was getting praised for it. I did it because, you know, all my brothers and sisters had their thing, and it just kind of turned out that being a good Christian was my thing. I got into junior high, and God began to test me. And instead of leaning on God, instead of embracing Him and getting that message He was trying to show me that He was the only thing I needed, He started to take things away from me. Instead of latching on to God, I told God I didn't need it. You know, Matthew 5, the parable of the sower, the seed that falls on the rocky ground, that was me. I shot up for a time. I looked just like everybody else. I talked like everybody else, but I had absolutely no roots. And the second that a test came my way, I was gone. Very literally, I made a prayer to tell God that I didn't need Him. So, obviously, things began to degrade with my family. Things began to degrade with my parents. It started really small. That's the thing about drifting. You know, when you're drifting, you never say, well, I'm starting to drift now, and in 2 years I'll be in this place. You know, it's not calculated. It's not mapped out. You began to drift, and then almost unnoticeably, day after day, you become further and further away from God. Started with my music. Started with my friends. Before I knew it, I was the complete opposite of what I had been before. I was listening to rage music all the time, constantly angry, constantly a burden on my parents. But when I turned 18, my parents kicked me out of the house. They really just couldn't deal with it anymore. I moved in with some friends of mine. I was proud of myself. I thought I was finally free. I was finally out of the tyranny of my parents' house, and I could finally do what I wanted to do. I could live it up. So moved in with some friends of mine. We began drinking, began using drugs pretty heavily. I lost all contact with my parents. They finally did track me down, though. I got a call and they said that we had to meet up. They didn't want to tell me this over the phone, but my brother was in his final year of med school, his last 3 months of med school, and he came down with testicular cancer. And basically the whole family was coming together to go see him. So I went to see my brother, and again, God put another amazing role model in my life. Corey was smiling and comforting everybody as we were coming into the room, and he was explaining to us exactly what was happening to his body, how it had spread through his lungs to his brain. He said that either God was going to perform a miracle and save his life, and we were all going to get to witness that, or he was going to go be in the eternal bliss of heaven with his God. So he really made it sound like a win-win situation, having testicular cancer. Very literally, on his deathbed, his lungs were filling up with fluid, and he was struggling to speak, but he wasn't terrified about his condition. He wasn't terrified about any of that. He was terrified about my soul, and he told me that if he didn't see me in heaven, I was going to ruin his afterlife. Yeah, so that didn't, I know, right? So after his death, I decided to do what any young man looking to change his life does. I joined the military, right? So I was just trying to run away from my problems. It obviously didn't work. I changed my geographical position, but it didn't change any of my inward condition. I was still the same scumbag. I was just in better shape and wearing a uniform. Oddly enough, I excelled in the military. I did everything they expected me to do. I was escalated all the way up into the ceremonial guards, a prestigious group of guys that render honor to fallen soldiers and shipmates in D.C. You probably have seen them on CNN at some point, standing there like statues. And, I was proud of myself. I thought, again, I had arrived. I'd done everything that I wanted to do. I knew where my life was heading. The more honors I received, the more arrogant I became. And the more arrogant I became a minister for my sin. And it's kind of hard for me to explain, but I was that person who was rallying people up to go out every night and do you. I was that person who was bragging every day about my heroic consumption of alcohol, about the womanizing, about the showing off my scars from fighting. If anybody said anything negative about how I was living or tried to talk to me about my life, I reacted violently. So like a knee-jerk reaction, I was in control. I was doing everything I wanted to do, and my life is exactly how I wanted it. There was a lot of people praying for me, and I think God is gracious, and God began to humble me. My body started to fail. All of a sudden, my shoulder gave out. After that, my hip gave out. All of a sudden, everything that I took so much pride in started to be taken away from me. And I didn't really have anything to brag about anymore. All of a sudden, the military kept promoting me until giving me early promotes and giving me all these honors, just stuck me in an office at a chair with a telephone that never rang and told me if it did ring, answer it, and I was just forgotten about it. So obviously, my self-worth kind of hit an all-time low. I left the military. I was married at the time. I wouldn't call it a depression. I would just say that, sin finally just got a solid hold on me. My heart was completely hardened towards God. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't care about myself. I couldn't care about my heart. I had a son at the time, Ethan. I became nothing more than a lying, cheating, abusive, cowardly drunk. I was completely addicted to alcohol. I destroyed that relationship. Walked right out of that relationship and walked straight into another one. And did I learn any lessons? No, I did the exact same thing. Because of how I acted at that time, I'm not allowed to see either of my sons, Ethan or Aiden, currently. Actually, after that last relationship, I spent some pretty solid time in jail. Somehow, in the middle of all this, I met Jennifer. I got involved in yet another relationship. again, I got out of jail, you would think that something would have triggered in my brain, but no, it didn't. I was the exact same person. Honestly, why she stayed with me, I really have no idea, and I really wasn't giving her any reason to. So, scumbag. Worthless. I'm 100%, that's how I felt about me. I was absolutely worthless. All I knew was to hurt people, all I knew how to do was to take people, to take from people. When I married Jennifer, my parents actually came out to the wedding and they told her not to marry me because they knew the person I was, they knew what I would do. That's good advice, actually. I'm not even mad at her for that. That was really sound advice at the time. But there were still a lot of people praying for me. I didn't know it at the time, but my family, their church, this huge network of all these Christians that I didn't know had been praying for me nonstop. And finally, when I was at my point, when I was the most worthless, when I was the most powerless against any of that, literally on my best day, I was nothing more than an act. God decided to change me. Before I go into the good half of the story, I just want to teach you guys a little bit of the terminology in case there's some people here that don't know the Christian lingo. So when we say we're saved, just so everybody knows, how do I explain it? So if you were out in the ocean and there was an undertow that was ripping you out to sea and you were struggling, that nothing you could do could get your head above the water, the harder you tried, the further you're getting out to sea, and a lifeguard were to jump in and pull you out, you would say that he saved you. Nice. Some people are still listening. All right. Or if you had cancer or some terminal illness, and a doctor were to come into your life, either cut in surgically or prescribe something and knock that whole illness out, you would say that he. Okay, good. Everybody's on board. So God reached down and he saved me. I was caught in an undertow of sin that nothing I could do could change. The harder I tried, the worse it got. I had an inoperable tumor inside of me that was eating away my very soul, and there was nothing I could do about it. God decided to intercede. He worked a miracle. I was working out in Poland Springs, and I have nerve damage in my ears, so I get a pretty serious ringing in it, and the atmosphere there was just incredibly loud. So I started driving home, and I had no music on, all the windows rolled up, just completely quiet, and I was just driving. It's an hour and 15 minutes drive. And I started coming home, and I was like, Jen, I don't know what's going on, but it really feels like God is just punching me in the face, like my whole ride home, and I don't really know how to explain it. And she's like, well, just listen. So, the next day it kept happening, and so finally I was having a conversation with God, and I said, I can't do it. I tried to do it before, God. It didn't work. I've tried countless times. I can't do any better than this. This is what I am. I can't change. And I literally told him I can't feel anymore. I can't make myself care. The miracle that God performed that day was for the first time I could feel the guilt. He reached in and he shattered that heart of stone that was inside of me. He allowed me to feel the guilt, the remorse, the shame that I should have been feeling that entire time. At that moment, I felt like a refrigerator sitting on my chest. I really can't describe that. I had to pull over and just talk to God. I said, okay, I get it. I'm not strong enough. I can't do this. I can't change. I'm going to trust you to do this. I'm going to give this to you. If you want me, you can have me. That night I gave my life to God, and that was about 2 years ago. Now it isn't something where you get changed and you get saved and all of a sudden you're perfect. I don't want anyone to think that immediately I became a saint. No, but it's like a whiskey glass. Pour out the whiskey out of the bottle. If you open, there's no whiskey left in it, but if you open the top of that bottle, it still stinks, right? You still smell the whiskey stink out of that thing. That was basically me. God did the miracle. He poured out that old nature. I began to desire things that were good, but periodically I still had that whiskey stink to me. But I can tell you today, I don't even struggle with alcohol. It's not a thing for me. I couldn't go into Tony's Foodland on my way home because I would stop and I would get alcohol. It hasn't even crossed my mind. I hate to admit this, but my family life, I always thought that I was more important than that. I was still wanting to go out, still wanting to do my own things, and God flipped that around and said, okay, put me first in your life, now your family's going to have the right priority. James became the second most important person to me. My children got their rightful place in my life. And it's all because a lot of people were praying for me, and God decided to intercede on my behalf. God's taking me in a new direction now. Right when I got saved, I told God I'd do anything He wanted unless it was being a pastor or doing any kind of, speaking in public. God has slowly taken away every other desire that I have, and He's been putting this right in front of me. I prayed about it, and God literally told me, we didn't get to witness the miracles of Jesus firsthand. We weren't there. When God tells us to go forward and bear witness, this is what we bear witness to: the miracle of salvation, the miracle that He performed in our lives. Because I don't need science to point me towards God. I don't need any type of psychology to point me towards God. I talked to God. God touched me, performed a miracle on me, and that's exactly what we need to tell everyone else in our lives. We need to tell them about the miracle of salvation. Keep pushing that message forward. So if anyone is here and they're unsure about what I'm talking about, if what I'm saying doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to you, or if you are saying, like, okay, there is a sin encroaching on my life, I don't have victory over sin yet. If you are still wrapped up in any of your shame, your guilt, there is an answer. There is hope. And I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't explain that to you. So very literally, the same God who with a flick of His wrist scattered the stars across the universe and with the Word created life. The same God that designed our brains and our nervous system. The same God that destroyed the mighty wall of Jericho, the same God that shook Mount Sinai with His presence, is the same God that answered Elijah's humble and fervent prayer with fire from heaven. The same hands that hold this world in its delicate balance are the same hands that were staked to a cross. God gave the most beautiful thing that He had. God gave His best for us to be with Him. And I don't think I have to reveal worthless. In and of myself, there was absolutely nothing I could do to remedy my lost condition. I was worthless. I didn't have a hope. My family gave up on me. Everyone else in my life should have given up on me, but God interceded. Not just that day, God sent His Son. God sent His Son down here to live with us, His creation, and then to die at the hand of His own creation. And not just to die, but this death was one of the most heinous deaths that man has ever concocted. Very literally, the purpose of the cross in that Roman era was, it was supposed to be so hideous, so revolting, that if people walking down the street would see a person on that cross, they would have no choice but to think, whatever that person did to get there, I don't want to do that. That was the purpose of the cross. He had his beard ripped out. He's beaten beyond recognition. He had a crown of thorns beaten with like a mallet onto his head. These weren't like raspberry bush thorns. This is like natural barbed wire, 2-3 inch leashes. They would actually use it around the top of the sheep pens to keep animals out because they weren't stupid enough to mess with them. On top of that, he was scourged, and the Bible kind of moves right across this point, but has anyone ever actually looked up scourging? Is anyone a scourging expert or know what that is? They'd actually tie the hands, and they would suspend them up, and they would stretch the body out until you were just on the palms of your feet. So the skin down your back was stretched tight, like a canvas. And it was actually a two-man team, and each man would have a whip. And in that whip there was fashioned, it was embroidered with sheep bone and sharp pieces of rocks. And this wasn't a whip that would tear straight across, but the actual purpose was one person would start at the neck, one person would start at the ankles. They would embed it into the skin, and then they would tear all the flesh away. That's what scourging is. When they said that they drug Jesus before Pilate, that wasn't a clever play on words. No man walked out of that room. Not even Jesus. After he carried that cross up onto Calvary, they drove the spikes in his wrists and his hands, and they had him suspended there. Again, there was really nothing on his back left. He was positioned right up against that cross. Every time he wanted to take a breath, he was actually in excruciating pain, pulling up on the wounds in his hands and his feet. The word excruciating is actually is kind of interesting. That word excruciating, actually, the root of the word means of the cross. It was actually so heinous that they came up with their own word to describe the punishment and the torture that was involved with the cross. That whole time when they were driving the nails into his hands, the whole time they were doing the scourging, the most precious thing that God had, dying, he was dying for me. That whole time he was thinking, he's worth it. That's the gift that God gave us. Now I'm adopted into a new family. Yet as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the children of God, even to them that believe on his name. I'm a child of God, a child of the living God. I have an inheritance waiting for me in heaven that is incorruptible and undefiled, that moth cannot eat and rust can't destroy. Through Jesus' sacrifice, I'm blameless in the sight of God. Blameless. I'm a blood-bought, born-again child of the King of Kings. If you are here and you haven't experienced that, today is the day. If you are here and you don't know what that forgiveness feels like, the Christian walk isn't perfect. The Christian walk isn't easy. I have to pick up my cross and I need to follow God every day. This is just testimony of that. The burden of my cross is never going to weigh as much as that guilt. It's never going to weigh as much as that shame. So if you want that free gift of salvation today, it is for you. Today is the day of salvation. Tomorrow is a mystery. I'm not saying that to scare anybody, but there is no guarantee for tomorrow. And even if God does bless you with it tomorrow, you'll have more sin to ask forgiveness of, and your heart will be even harder. It will be harder for you to repent. I guarantee that in 80 or 100 years is the only thing that will matter to you is where you're going to spend your eternity. So today is the day of salvation. Today is the day of new life.